I'm joined by my political panel this afternoon, Liberal MP Tim Wilson and Labor MP Anne Ali. Tim Wilson, let's start with you because you, of course, took a photo that became kind of infamous if you're on social media in Hong Kong showing solidarity with protesters. What's your response to this unfolding situation in Hong Kong this afternoon?
Well, I wouldn't call my photo infamous.
I will.
A clear statement about. Well, that's fine. I'm very proud of the photo and for standing up with the people of Hong Kong against authoritarian regime and the denial of liberties as is occurring. So, of course, I'm deeply disturbed, as many people are around the world, in looking at what's occurring in Hong Kong. The national security legislation, to me, is quite clearly designed to broaden the scope of influence of Beijing over Hong Kong, to threaten the very system of relationship of one country, two systems that's supposed to operate in Hong Kong. And we know the language of the law is very loose and used and will, I suspect, sadly be used as a justification to suppress dissent and difference of opinion and the freedoms that the people of Hong Kong have been raised with, come to expect and should continue to expect. As, by the way, I think so should the people of China.
Yeah. Anne Ali, these images, of course, I mean, this is, I think quite disturbing developments. Tim Wilson talking about, being proud of showing solidarity with people in Hong Kong. What do you make of that unfolding situation that's emerging on the streets this afternoon?
I'm on a unity to get with Tim on this, Patricia. I share his concerns for the well-being and the freedom of the people of Hong Kong. I mean, this is in line with some of the world's most repressive regimes, where people can be imprisoned indefinitely for criticising the government or for criticising the ruling parties there. So I certainly share Tim's concerns, and I share your assessment of the situation, that it is particularly disturbing. It's very disturbing, and I think that Australia should speak with quite a strong voice about the situation in Hong Kong and use everything that we can to stand up and stand in solidarity with the people there.
Yeah, Tim Wilson, Australia has, of course, previously made statements officially, the Foreign Minister, about sort of Hong Kong in the past. What do you think the Australian government should be doing, or at a bipartisan level, actually, because both of you seem to be saying similar things? How should we be dealing with this issue? Obviously, it looks like we're in the freezer with China as it is. Should we be being quite active in this space?
Well, I think we've already made very clear statements, both when protests were occurring this year, but also more recent events in the past 72 hours. Our Foreign Minister and our government was one of the governments that stood up and spoke out. Frankly, what we need to be doing is working with other countries and encouraging other countries to stand up and speak out as well. Of course, we can't confront the Chinese Communist Party and its intentions over Hong Kong in isolation. We need other freedom-loving countries to stand up and speak out. But of course, should the situation arise where some dissidents fear for their lives, they're of course entitled to be able to apply for our refugee program, and that operates already under existing law.
Yeah, it's interesting you raised the refugee program. Do you think that is something that Australia should ultimately, if it escalates, and obviously I say the scenes are disturbing, we don't know what will happen in coming days or months, should that be something that Australia pursues? Actually, not just saying we've got an open door, but actually, sort of making it quite clear that we want to stand in solidarity with these people and will stand up to help them.
Well, every time this has been discussed, and I've had people, dissidents and people talking to me about it from Hong Kong, but at this point, and up until this point, the people who may be covered by it also want to stay and defend their homeland and the freedoms that they grew up with. But of course, I think the reality is we sadly may face a scenario where we have to accept people from Hong Kong who may be the target or may face legitimate fears of persecution from their own government. I hope it doesn't end up there, but of course we have to consider all these options open.
Yeah, and Ali, I think Tim's point is right. I think a lot of these people do want to stand up and stay there and make their case, but should Australia be an open place looking to help people who are dissidents, who don't feel like they can stay?
Our refugee program should always be responsive to global trends and what's going on in the world. I mean, you know, we've recently had huge displacement, numbers of displaced people from various parts of the Middle East, from Syria and Iraq, and we were responsive in that regard. So our refugee intake should continue to be responsive to what's happening globally. I agree with Tim. I think that, you know, in speaking out against this, there's a place for Australia to have that kind of bilateral discussion around human rights with China, but it'll be much more effective when we go in collectively with a number of other countries and raise concerns.
Let's talk about borders. Borders inside our country. I mean, the world's changed so much. I can't believe I'm talking about borders like we do now. But Anna-Lee, we'll start with you because it has changed. This is our normal now. We're having this debate around when all the borders will reopen. You're in WA, where there are strong border closures, of course, and that could continue. Is there really a sort of public health case for that? Because we've been told quite clearly that the medical advice, Paul Kelly said it to me directly, the medical advice is that you don't need to close domestic borders.
Well, I think we've recently had the case of a ship that's come in, ship of an export ship come in, and there have been cases there. And I think that in itself is a good example of why we need to maintain our border closures for now until it is safe to do so. We had yesterday 2 cases in New South Wales schools. 2 children, one in Year 5 and one in Year 7, I believe, who came down with the virus, and they've had to close 2 schools in New South Wales. So until we are absolutely sure that there is no risk of a second wave of this, I am inclined to take the lead and listen to the lead of our Premier, Mark McGowan, who has done a stellar job so far. And I think that, you know, his decision to keep the WA border closed for now is the right decision.
Tim, Pauline Hanson has given the Queensland Premier 1 day to open the border, or she'll file a case in the High Court. I think she's trying to raise money. I don't know where that sort of raising of the money is last at. It wasn't very high this morning. It may have gone up. Do you have sympathy for her push to reopen the border? Because I spoke yesterday to Matt Canavan, on your side of politics, so national, but either way on the government side, and he said he has sort of sympathy for states' rights and we have to be careful about eroding states' rights. How do you see it?
Well, I don't think states' rights is the argument we should be invoking. In the end, we sit as part of the Commonwealth. I agree with the health advice that says that there's no case for these measures. We can't live in an environment that's perfectly free of risk, but if the health advice says that it's unjustified, we know the health risks are very low, whereas the economic, and I don't just mean because of the dollars and cents, I'm talking about the livelihoods of the tourism sector and the like, and all those people who depend on it, is very real, and particularly for Queensland. Now, ultimately, this is a decision for the people of Queensland and their Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk. But I struggle to see, based on the health advice, how these measures can continue to be justified. And frankly, I think it would not be an unwelcome thing I think it would be a welcome thing to have it tested in the High Court, because it would be interesting to see, and I think the High Court would love the opportunity to decide whether states can close their borders, particularly when the health advice and the health evidence says it's no longer justified because of the negative impact it's having, but also a question of whether it's consistent with our Constitution.
So you think it's worth actually testing this in the High Court? You think it would be a useful case? What do you hope to find out? Why do you think there's a sort of grey on this?
Well, I think it comes down to assessing whether it's proportionate or not. But, I mean, I think these areas of law are contested. As far as I'm aware, there's not a case related to, pandemics and the closure of borders quite like this in the past. So it's an interesting area of law to explore. If Ms Hanson wants to take it and pay for the costs, then I look forward to seeing what the outcome is.
Anna-Lee, is it worth testing in the courts or at the High Court?
Well, I just think it's pretty extraordinary that we're in a time when Pauline Hanson is arguing for borders to be open. I mean, who would have Who would have thought? Who would have thunk it? Look, I don't necessarily agree that it's worth testing in the High Court. I think it's a lot of effort for something that I think, if we just follow the health advice and do as we've been doing as a nation in coming together and everyone doing their part, we'll get through this. I just don't think it's the right time for these kinds of testing of laws, to be honest.
Let's just talk about industrial relations reform. The union movement has been, open to sitting on the table, being included in these 5 key areas of reform. The Prime Minister has demanded that everyone put their ideological weapons down. Tim Wilson, have you put your weapons down?
Well, our focus has always been on what we need to do to get more people in work. So if it's an ideological objective to want to have more Australians employed so they can stand on their own 2 feet, so they can support them and their families, buy homes and earn a livelihood, then I'm not sure that anybody would want us to stop pursuing those objectives. They're critical for the country. And what we know is that around the world, lots of countries, pretty much all countries, are going to be looking at how they're going to recover from this crisis. And that means we're going to have a competitive environment internationally where people want to attract investment to grow jobs. So industrial relations and what we need to do in that is a critical part of that discussion. So's tax, so's energy investments to make sure Australia's the place you want to do business so we can create the jobs to employ Australians so they can earn a livelihood.
And Ali, Labor's been saying it's not extraordinary or it should send shivers down the spines of workers, whereas it seems the union movement's been a little more open to being part of this. Why is Labor, taking more of a negative spin on this?
I don't think Labor's taking a negative spin on it at
just
all.
yesterday, I'll tell you why. I'm being really specific then. Let me be really specific. Yeah. Richard Marles told me it should send a shiver down the spine of workers. So, I don't know. Sounds a little negative.
Well, let's look at the history then, Patricia. We've got a history here of a government that spent 7 years attacking unions. We've got a history here of a government that wanted to introduce a union-busting bill in Parliament. This is the party that brought us work choices. So, I think there is cause for a certain caution in the way that this is approached. And, great. Welcoming, of course, the workers and workers' rights being there on the table and workers' voices to the table. But everyone's absolutely right. It shouldn't be extraordinary. It's only extraordinary because of the track record of this government and their approach to unions in the past.
So, you don't want to. I understand that you're saying it shouldn't be, but if it is, do you give them credit for perhaps abandoning ideology? I mean, we'll have to see. Obviously, there has to be proof in what people come up with, but at least the attempt. Yeah, but there is an attempt, obviously, for a ceasefire.
I watched the Prime Minister's speech yesterday with bated breath, right? Only to have him announce with great fanfare that the big plan is for Christian Porter to chair 5 working groups. It's not a plan. Where is the plan? Where is this abandoning of ideology? I think we've just got to pause for a minute and let this play out before we make any kinds of determinations. Is it good that workers' voices are being brought to the table? Yes, they are, but let's not forget the history and the context that has led to this as well. Everyone talking about the plan, we've got plans and we've got reports and we've got reviews about IR and about training and about job creation. The time for posturing and the time for further talk is over and done with. Let's get into actually doing something and getting some action and seeing some outcomes here.
Tim Wilson, I'll end with you. A critique there from Anne Ali saying essentially there was no plan, there was a plan for a plan. That's kind of right, isn't it? There's 5 working groups, there's brainstorming at this stage.
No, I don't agree with that at all. What we have is a clear pathway to bring parties to the table to have a discussion about the root causes of problems that will create barriers to employ more Australians. What we then want to do is get clarity on those problems and then how we can work together to resolve them. Modern leadership isn't about taking control and ownership for yourself. It's about bringing people together and collaborating towards a better future. That's the proposal that Scott Morrison outlined yesterday in his approach in the National Press Club. It's the one he's tasked with Christian Porter to go on and implement. And the only people who are condemning, who don't want to be a part of this discussion, and so far have attacked it, have been the Labor Party. You just heard it there, and you heard it from Richard Marles in your interview with him yesterday. I mean, I would have thought that if you see a government coming together, working with all sectors of the economy, small business, big business, workers, the trade unions, that it would be a welcome opportunity to be able to improve the employment opportunities for millions of Australians who are currently unemployed and, frankly, don't need the tired games of Richard Marles and Anne Ali.
Look, just a little question for you, Tim Wilson. The unemployment benefit was doubled. Job Seeker is what it's called now. It's meant to bounce back to its old New Start rate. Would you like to see it at a higher rate?
Well, I think we have to consider the consequences of every decision we make very clearly, because one of the things we don't want is to have a welfare system that acts as a disincentive for people getting jobs. I said right at the start, the approach of the government around industrial relations is how do we get Australians into jobs to support themselves, to earn a livelihood, to support their families, to buy a house, and to be able to support and help others. And that's got to be the focus. And, of course, these issues are all going to be discussed as part of achieving
Sure, but what's your
objective.
personal view? Do you think that that rate of New Start is too low?
Well, I think we're going to have a review against all of these measures. We're going to have against JobKeeper, we're going to have against JobSeeker to assess these things, because you can set a number, but a number is merely arbitrary.
Oh, look, I'm not asking you for a final number, but do you think it should be higher than that low amount?
No. Well, I think what should be done is clearly marked against what will encourage people to seek out employment, to secure employment so that they can stand on their own 2 feet and have a job. That's the objective.
Thanks to both of you.
Thanks, Patricia.
Liberal MP Tim Wilson and Labor MP Anne Ali joining me there.